Okay, this is the redo because the video filming yesterday didn't work. So I don't have anybody in my classroom, but we're gonna just do this very quickly and I will try to explain everything. This is the handout that will be in the folder and was sent to the chat. And the reason I created this is there are some valuable vocabulary related terms that every teacher should know. Then there's a little section here about how we know a word and how our students know a word. So different ways that we know words. And then down here is an example that I will talk about and walk through at the end of the presentation. All right, so I just want to say that I am by no means an expert on vocabulary instruction. My goal is always to improve myself and the way that I teach students vocabulary so that I am ensuring that they are actually getting the best that I can give to them. So I am always looking for better ways to teach vocabulary and to engage my students in learning vocabulary outside of the textbook vocabulary that we engage with. So how I've decided to do my vocabulary this semester is a little bit every day, so that the entire week they will work with a set of 15 terms, and in doing so they will be continuously working with the words to become more familiar with them before we move on to a new set of words, instead of me just giving them the words once and expecting them to learn them. So the way that I set this presentation up is to show how I will work with each day to move through this content. So of course our first day is Monday. So on Monday is when they will get their terms, and the first step whenever they get a term is to guess the meaning of the word. So this is from week 19 of fall semester, but I only left 3 terms on here instead of showing you the full 10 that they were given that day or that week. So these are the 3 terms that we're gonna look at for this presentation. So how this works is students would put, I think bestow means, and they guess. This helps a student know if they actually know a word or not. A way to ensure that you really know a word is to be able to say the definition of that word in your own words. Then you know that you know the word. And of course, being able to use it in sentences and everything like that. So if they find out that they actually kind of know contemplate, then they know that that is a word they don't have to study as much. Now they may have to still study it for pronunciation or usage, but if they know the meaning, that means that they're already a little bit ahead on that word. And so they can focus on words that they don't know, like maybe hierarchy. So after this, we go into an activity. So the first activity we will do is that they will discuss the individual choices in their group. And you give them as much time as you want for this. If they get through at least 3 words, that's fine. If they get through all of them, if you have time for that, that's fine. But basically they're gonna discuss their individual choices. And then on one piece of paper, the group or the pairs will come to a consensus and decide that they like a certain term or a certain definition the best. And then what they would do is actually write it out like as a definition. So they would put the word, a hyphen or colon, and then what their guess was as a definition. So once they do that, then we would do a share out. So you would call on a group and say, can you tell us what you guessed, what you thought your group's best guess was for the term bestow. And then you can give stickers if a group is really close, or you could just tell them, very good, you were the closest, however you want to do it. Or you can just let them share. And then sometimes they'll share something funny so you get a good chuckle out of it and the students have a good time. From there we move on to denotation, the definition. However, based on what I did with my research, one of the things that suggested you do is read a sentence and or passage to show the context of the word. So, and later I'll show you again the full structure of what they want you to do. But here are the sentences. Usually I hide the speaker sound audio clip thing, but I didn't do that this time. So I have recorded audio so that I don't have to say all the sentences, so the pronunciation will be clear. So here are the 3 sentence examples.
The university decided to bestow an honorary degree upon the renowned scientist in recognition of her groundbreaking research and contributions to the field. As she sat by the serene lake, she took a moment to contemplate the choices she had made in life and the paths that lay ahead of her. In the corporate world, a clear hierarchy is essential for maintaining order, with each level of management responsible for overseeing the employees beneath them and ensuring that company goals are met.
So if you wanted to, you could actually give them these sentences and then have them share out, because this should help them in context kind of fine-tune the definition a little bit. But I feel like letting them see their guesses just cold without any other support really helps them know if they know the word. So I just feel like that's a benefit, but you can do it this way. So here is next is a passage using all three words.
In the grand ceremony held at the town hall, the mayor was set to bestow awards upon individuals who had made significant contributions to the community. As she prepared her speech, she took a moment to contemplate the impact of their efforts, reflecting on how each person's dedication had helped to elevate the community's spirit and cohesion. She admired the natural hierarchy that had formed among the volunteers, where seasoned members guided newcomers, creating a supportive network that fostered growth and collaboration.
When it comes to the passage, I suggest that you really do this, even if you don't do the sentences. The reason I suggest this is because you can either have the students all participate and you can write a passage together, or you can actually write your own or have AI generate one. And in so doing, it shows how students can actually incorporate these terms into a paragraph, into their writing. Now, unfortunately, these three terms are pretty much related, but this is really beneficial if terms don't seem like they have relation to each other, and you show students how they can still use these terms, that they're not mutually exclusive. As long as the context all connects, you can use the words. And we have an activity later that shows that. But I feel like giving them any kind of example is just gonna benefit their writing and using vocabulary. All right, so now we're gonna go into the denotation. And so again, I use audio recording for this. And where I get all this audio from is a website called 11 Labs, like the number 11, but spelled out, E-L-E-V-E-N. So, E-L-E-V-E-N, yeah. So 11 Labs, and so they have a free account, and I believe your credits renew daily. If they don't renew daily, they renew every week, I believe. It's not monthly. I believe they renew fairly quickly. So you can actually generate audio that is actually very high quality for free. And it's called 11 Labs. It's either 11labs.com or 11labs.ai. You could just search it and just search 11 Labs and then click on the website, it shows up.
Bestow, to present a gift or honor to someone, to confer. Contemplate, to think deeply about something, to consider carefully. Hierarchy, a system of organization in which people or groups are ranked according to status or authority.
All right, so my students will then write the denotation for all of the terms. I will give them time to do that, and then we go into our next activity, which is focusing on connotation. So what they'll do is in their groups, they will work on connotation and determine, as a group, if they are positive, negative, or neutral. Now, I have a very comprehensive notebook entry for my students, okay? But the connotation is part of it. But if you want to use connotation in the school issued notebook, all you have to do is where the illustration goes, change that to connotation. Connotation is very important because if a student is going to write and they want to really enforce the negative of something, then they can focus on a term that has a negative connotation. And so that way it more enforces the tone of the writing because they've chosen a word that negatively connects to a person rather than a neutral term that doesn't have a negative impact on a person reading the piece. So having students look at connotation is very important because again, it will help with their writing in the end. All right, So then they're gonna write the connotation in their entry, but you can just have them do it on a paper, or you can just have them discuss aloud as a class. And then I have them write why it is important. So basically their entry will say negative connotation, and then they will do a semicolon, and they will say, I think that the term carries this connotation because, and they will give the reason. Okay? Then for their homework, they have to make flashcards. Flashcards are very important when it comes to learning vocabulary. When students are looking through a notebook, they have everything in front of them. So they're just reading it. They're not really studying it. So when you have your students create flashcards, you can use the flashcards as a bell ringer during the week. So you can say, all right, everybody get out your flashcards, and they can sit them on their desk and not touch them, and you can give a definition. So you can say, an insect that pollinates flowers and is usually striped yellow and black. Okay, that's the way that I would explain a bee. I don't know what the actual definition would be. And they have to quickly, you could say go, and they have to find their flashcard, and the first student that holds up the flashcard that says bee on it, that's a compulsory word, by the way, you can give them a sticker. And so you can make it a challenge, and you can also tell them you cannot look at the definition side, you can only look at the term side, or you can tell them, I'm gonna give you a term, find it based on the definition. There's a lot of different ways you can use flashcards outside of just having your kids study. And I also have them create their contextual sentences without using AI, obviously, because if they use AI, then they're not learning anything. And then we move into our Tuesday.
Bestow root base, stow, Old English meaning place, area, prefix, be, Old English meaning on all sides, thoroughly, suffix, none, history. The prefix intensifies the meaning of stow, suggesting an act of giving or placing something purposefully.
Okay, so on Tuesdays, they will be getting the root, the affixes, and history or a fun fact or an interesting fact or something to help further connect themselves to the word. Again, I'm only going to show you the 3. This is the one that will take the most time. So it is up to you how much of this you want to do. I am very much an advocate of the prefix and suffix, the affixes, studying these, because eventually, if you do enough words that start with B as a prefix, they will become very familiar with its meaning, and it will help them later when they're reading words to determine the meaning of words. So let's go through the other 2.
Contemplate, root base, temple, Latin templum meaning a space for observation, prefix, con, Latin meaning with or thoroughly, suffix. 8, Latin used to form verbs, meaning to make or cause, history. The word originally implied observing omens in sacred spaces. Over time, it evolved to mean thinking deeply or reflecting. Hierarchy, root base. Here, arch, Greek hieros, meaning sacred, plus arch from archine, meaning to rule, prefix, none suffix. By, Greek meaning characterized by or resulting in, history. The term evolved to describe any system of ranks or orders, not just religious ones.
The reason I use audio again is because I can't pronounce a lot of the Latin roots, so, or Greek roots. So if I have an AI voice pronounce it for me, then I'm not going this word, which is what I would do in the past. All right. So after we do that, we just move into Wednesday. So Tuesday is used for TOEFL. So I know how much time I have for TOEFL. So you would have to, maybe you could switch Wednesdays and Tuesdays content, or just not do any of this. It's entirely up to you. Again, my kids are advanced, and these are advanced terms, but you can apply some of these tips and tricks with the compulsory MS Spark. So on Wednesday, because Wednesday is usually a test day, and I don't ever want to take up too much time on Wednesdays, all we look at are word forms. So here are the 3 word forms. And one thing I would say is if we don't tend to use, like bestowment, we don't tend to use that. It's used, but very rarely. You can always point out to your students that it's rarely used. And then of course we go into our collocations. Collocations are word connections, where words are connected together commonly, where you would most likely see them, such as corporate hierarchy, social hierarchy, organizational hierarchy. That's where you would tend to see these. So collocations are really good, again, for strengthening students' writing. Alright, so that would be all I do on Wednesday, because again, I don't wanna mess with any of my test time. Thursday and Friday in my class is specifically vocabulary, activities, and instruction. So the first thing I do is I go into, let's see, I think it's this one. Alright, so we play a game of Jeopardy. So this would take up the first 45 minutes of my Thursday, Friday classes for language acquisition. Now there's no categories for my Jeopardy. I can just click this actually. So how it works is I just named them after Disney characters. You can do whatever you want to do. And I am an advocate of synonyms. I have decided that this semester I'm not going to even focus on antonyms. Originally they were going to have antonyms as well. I always have them do 3 synonyms and 3 antonyms. The issue is that antonyms, you're not often wondering what the opposite of something is that you want to say. That's very rare. So synonyms are exceptionally helpful. Not only does it help students with their writing, it helps with their reading comprehension, but it also helps them to learn 4 words at a time. Because if you've already learned a word and then you learn 3 related words, it's easier to learn the 3 related words because they're related. Okay, so basically you would just go in and this is a synonym of a term, okay? And you can have the students answer it. I believe this one is eloquent. I believe this is a synonym for eloquent, I believe. It makes sense, so I'm thinking it is. But you can either just have them give you the term, or you could actually have them do it the way Jeopardy is. So what is a synonym for eloquent? They can say, what is another way to say eloquent? And we'll see if I'm correct. Woohoo, I am, so there we go. All right, so then they would get the points, and then you can have a winning team that gets stickers, or they get bonus points on a board if you keep track. That gets them like a homework pass, or whatever your rewards are for your classroom. So that is essentially what we would do for the entire first period of Thursday and Friday's class. And you can use Jeopardy, you can use any of the content, the mystery box games, any of those kind of games you have to just teach them the synonyms. Again, antonyms aren't that important. The thing that I did mention in the training was that in the vocab notebook, you can still use the act of synonyms. What I make my students do is they put the term from the compulsory book or the supplemental book in the first little square, and they complete that square. So they complete the entry, right? But then on the entry next to that one, or on its own page, but I really prefer they do it next to it. On the entry next to it, they define the 3 synonyms. So I make it so my students have to give me 3 synonyms for each term. And then on the little box next to it, they just use that box to define those 3 synonyms. And there are their 4 words. Okay, so that's a way you can use that. All right, so after we do the Jeopardy, the synonyms and antonyms, we move into our activity. And we're gonna do a vocabulary chain. This is a group activity. So what you do is you give them all a piece of paper, and they each get their own sheet of paper. You have them write their name on it, because sometimes you may want to collect it and look at it, other times you may not. But it's best to have, well, they need their name on it because the paper's gonna move around and they need to get it back. And they need their name on it in case you collect it, so you can get it back to them later. All right, so then they're gonna write a sentence using any term, synonym, or antonym, but I will change that. Any terms or synonym that we've learned over the week. And so they use that. So if you think about it, my students will have 15 terms, and then they will have 3 synonyms per term. So they have a lot of words to work with. If you give your kids 5 to 10 terms, that is a good number from the compulsory or the supplementary book. If you give them 5 terms and 3 synonyms per term, again, a good group to work with. You want to make sure they have a nice solid word bank to work with to do this activity. Okay, so then they're going to write the sentence and underline the term. Then they're going to, when you tell them, you're going to say pass the paper to the student on your left after you give them enough time. If you want to give them time, you can say, okay, you have 1 minute and set a timer. That's totally fine. They pass it to the student on their left, and then they read the sentence that is on their paper in front of them, and they write The next sentence using a related term. Now when I say related term, I don't mean a synonym for that word or a word that's even connected. Just like I said, teaching students that they can connect words that don't seem like they have a connection is an amazing strength to writing. So for example, the two terms that I use for the example are dilemma and augment, which don't seem like they're related at all, okay? So she decided to augment the project with more research. So she decided to add research, right? And then the next student can write, that led to a dilemma, a problem about including too much information because she added more and now there's too much, okay? So you let them continue doing this until you feel like they've done enough, and then you have them stop and give the paper back to the original student so they can see what was created. Sometimes you'll just have normal stuff, but sometimes if students are really like funny kind of students, they like to be funny, and they're with their friends in a group, they're gonna write funny stuff. And so the kids will really enjoy this a lot of times if they're in a group of students they get along with and have fun with. So it's just a fun activity that you can do to strengthen sentence writing and get them practicing using the vocabulary correctly. All right, so another activity you could do is where the students choose 6 words from whatever amount of words you've given them. And they have to use the words correctly. Now with this, it's not including the synonyms. It is the actual terms that they were being taught that I require them to do. It's not the synonyms, it's working with the words they were actually given. So they need to create a 2-sentence dialogue or a 2-sentence story so they would use, just like that, with that 2 sentences there, they would use one word in one sentence and another word in another sentence. But their dialogue or their story can only be 2 sentences. This again challenges them to, again, use the vocabulary correctly, practice sentence structure, and also being succinct, not being too wordy. It helps them with being succinct. Then I have them create comprehension check questions. This is really good for a lot of reasons. It's 1, to make sure your students are really understanding the words. 2, it can help you with test questions or bell ringer questions or exit tickets. So having them create comprehension check questions is a really good skill for them, and it will also benefit you in the end. Okay, so here are some tips for learning vocabulary. Okay, so you can have your students, again, create flashcards and use them as bell ringer activities, like I said. Okay, use AI to generate images or video clips to show more difficult terms to students. So if there's a term that's really hard for them to grasp, you can create an image. You can use AI to make a short 5-second video clip or something. All right, regularly use these terms when you talk to your students. Base word or root, prefix, suffix, of course affix, which is prefix and suffix. It's a combination of telling you that you're talking about those. If you have time, you can find an affix that is high utility, which means it's used a lot, and teach that affix, whether it's a prefix or a suffix. And then your students can learn an affix and be able to apply again the definition of it to future words that they read. So over 60% of all words in the English language contain Latin or Greek affixes and are roots, and over 90% of discipline specific, so like medical, scientific, mathematical, they contain Latin or Greek affixes or roots. All right, so here's an example of teaching the root, spect. So if you teach the root spect, look at all these words that are connected to that root. So if you teach a root or a suffix or a prefix, the students could learn like 10, 20, 30 words. Because once you teach that, then it's a lot easier for them to start figuring out the meanings of other words. So they're learning a lot more words without explicitly being taught those words, if it makes sense. Which hopefully makes sense. All right, so here's the example for the vocabulary structure that's on the handout. So if you have the handout printed, you can just follow along. So the first thing it says is to define the word. So first you read a sentence or a passage aloud. This is an example of the math term quadrant, okay? So we would read the sentence aloud. So perpendicular lines divide the surface plane into 4 quadrants. That would be the example of the sentence. And then we would tell the students, all right, our term here, our word is quadrant. And you would have the student repeat it, quadrant. Make sure you listen for pronunciation. If they're not quite saying it right, or not all your students are saying the word, then you just have them repeat it, quadrant. Then you're supposed to give them denotation that's student friendly. So a quadrant is one of 4 parts of a surface. It is 1/4 of a surface. Okay, you can also write on the board as you need to. Okay, then you ask your students, so based on our definition, our denotation, what are some context clues we can spot in our sentence? Your students should be able to tell you things like divide and for. Provide clues to the meaning of the quadrant. So if you divide the surface plane into 4 quadrants, the 4 is actually unnecessary, but it's put there because it's repetitive to say 4 quadrants. I mean, if you say quadrants, they know. But it's put there to help with the context clues. So if they were actually going to write this sentence, they would omit the 4 because perpendicular lines divide the surface plane into quadrants. Perpendicular, right? Okay, so I know some math terms. Moving on. Then you want to give them a visual. Okay, so the next step is to use some kind of text feature to solidify an image in their mind or solidify the meaning in their mind. So then we see our quadrants, perpendicular. Okay, so you can kind of explain that a little bit. Okay, and then we move into the roots and affixes as necessary. So quadrant has the last Latin prefix quad. It actually has one that's a little more complex, but quad is easier for me to say, which means 4. So that tells me that a quadrant has something to do with 4 things. Okay, and then you would explain, so this is a demonstration, you would say if I were to divide a pie into quadrants, I would evenly divide it into 4 sections. So you could just draw a pie and make it into quadrants, or whatever example. This is a math example again, so. Then you would have your students work with a dictionary or glossary entry if you feel like you wanted to go to that level. I feel like them learning to look things up in dictionaries is a very exceptional skill. I can't tell you how many times my students have looked up a word, told me the word was not in there, in the dictionary, and then I've just turned to it and shown them where it is. Learning to look things up in a dictionary is very, very, very important. Okay, and then you ask them a comprehension check question basically. So you would say, can a triangle be divided into quadrants? And then explain your answer. What was really good about the demo yesterday was some of the teachers actually tried and then showed me, yes, this is how. And I'm like, okay. I didn't even bother to try because math, okay? But that's an example of like an actual structure, one of the many ways that you could structure a vocabulary lesson, especially for terms that your students are really, really struggling with. You don't want to do this with everything because it would just inundate them with too much stuff. But if there's a term or a set of terms you really want to solidify, you can use any of these methods. Just for review sakes, you can use the activities and all these other things. For my students, I don't tend to go this deep with the compulsory or the spark terms. They only have the intense notebook entry. I'm pointing there, you can't see it, but I have an example of it there. They only do their intense notebook entry and this in-depth of a study on the advanced terms, which like I said are 15 per week. They don't have to make flashcards for the compulsory or the spark, but for lower phases, then that would probably definitely be a benefit. So again, sorry this was a bit awkward and probably a bit long, but I did promise some teachers that I would refilm it to see if I could create it, so hopefully it's okay. If you have any suggestions or comments or questions, you can just message me directly, and thank you very much for watching.